On my honor, I will never betray my badge, my integrity, my character, or the public trust. I will always have the courage to hold myself and others accountable for their actions. I will always uphold the Constitution, the community, and the agencies.
All right. Well, John, welcome to the show.
Hey, Wayne, thanks for having me, man. You know, it's taken us a while, but, good things take time sometimes, kind of like the old thing we've been hearing, wine, and this is, it was worth the wait.
You're absolutely right. And I think things happen when they're supposed to happen. So I'm excited to finally get to sit down and have this conversation with you.
Yeah, me too, man. We met in Orlando right before the COVID-19 fallout. And you were saying earlier, man, how surprising is it that nobody got sick from the Podfest? And I'm just blessed that we were able to meet there. And this is what, the result of it. And what a good time. So thank you.
Absolutely. And yeah, just the relationships, the people that I've gotten to meet, especially within that military CreatorCon community, has just been absolutely phenomenal. So I'm sure we'll get a little bit more into that as we go. Sure. I like to start out with my guests just kind of asking some get to know you, break the ice type questions. So coffee or tea, John?
Tea, but man, that was a transition. I started out a coffee guy, but it got to be like 6, 7, 8 cups a day. And my wife didn't like it. So
yes.
It was like, I'll go with the green tea now. Right. So,
okay. Yeah. Once we get to the addiction level, that's probably smart.
Probably. Yeah, you're right, man.
What's your favorite place to have that cup of tea?
First thing in the morning, I like to have it right here in my study. You can see some of the paraphernalia behind me. I feel at home here, and lots of good memories of, warriors and warriorettes who I've known. And I've got my books here, but early in the morning, 4 to 5 o'clock. And I like a little bit of lemon in it, and I like a little bit of honey.
Very good. Yeah, I find those morning hours seem to be a pretty popular answer for when people just like to decompress and take a moment.
Yep.
Well, let me ask you, John, do you have a best or worst travel story?
Man, yeah, I do. I used to lead guided trips to South America, and we used to go to Argentina, and we used to go to Bolivia, Ecuador, and we traveled dozens of times. Most of the trips were good, but a lot of times our baggage wouldn't make it, and so as climbers, you need your gear. And a lot of times it was always hit and miss. Bolivia had some problems. So I just say, the worst stories is when the equipment didn't show up or showed up too late. And even coming back from South America, a lot of times stuff wouldn't show. But you just, any trip, I don't know if they're good or bad. It is what it is. And you just adapt and overcome. And I'd have to say, even with the bad trips where things didn't seem to work out, they were awesome, man. So I look at anything these days at this stage of the game, just blessed to be here. And, any trip's a good trip to me. I don't care if the baggage shows up or not. We can always drop $10 at the local store and, pick up a serape and some boots or something,
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, many times, and it's true what they say, the journey really can be as good, if not better, than the destination sometimes. So just having the trip, and even when things go awry, sometimes that's the lesson and the story.
But man, I tell you, learn to speak the language, or at least hire somebody that's a good guide, because a lot of times you think these people in these countries are talking about you, and they're just talking about, what's going on in their day. And, you can get real paranoid. What are they saying? What are they doing? And just learn to speak the language wherever you go.
Very good. Yeah. So what is that place that brings you the most peace? Where's that favorite spot to just kind of stop and breathe and enjoy life?
Anytime outdoors. I owned a backpacking store for, 23 years, my wife and I. And, I always seem to thrive in the outdoors. And that really started back when I was in grade school as a Boy Scout, Cub Scout, Webelow, Boy Scout. And there always seemed to be a certain serenity in the great outdoors. I felt more at home there. Yeah. Outdoors, man.
Great answer. I was asking everyone their favorite quarantine activity, but I'm going to switch that up a little bit for you. What opportunities has the quarantine provided?
Hey, it's left me an opportunity to meet people like this more on Zoom. I did a lot of Zoom meetings, some stuff on Skype, allowed me to use my phone a lot more instead of email. It was kind of cool because, even with these techno tools, we live in this day and age where everything is so quick, and it seems like, we don't have time. And, being able to just take a collective deep sigh, even though it's ruined a lot of people's lives. Some people died and some people's businesses may never reopen.
Right.
It's given us this opportunity to maybe reconnect with something inside and with each other. And I think, Wayne, that's what everybody's looking for these days in today's world. I call it the bling bling syndrome. We latch on to something and then the excitement of it goes away. And because we've got so much opportunity in techno world, we just bounce from thing to thing to thing to thing. And it felt really good to just take a deep breath, just to think for a while.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's so true and so powerful, because you're right. I like that term bling bling syndrome, because that is exactly what it is. We run from one thing to the next and never slow down to actually enjoy that moment.
So true, man. And even like in relationships and business, you'll meet somebody and you'll hit it off and there'll be this great synergistic energy, and then it just peters out because the proverbial word is work. And you have to work at building relationships. And when you can do that, the relationships are longer lasting. People trust you. I can't tell you how many in this digital world, everything shifted in 2012, but I got to tell you, man, it's had moments of sheer frustration and anger because, simple things like returning an email don't happen. It's like, holy cow, you kidding me? So yeah, it's nice to slow down a bit for sure.
Yeah. Do you think some of that, this is a complete rabbit trail, but when you made that comment about some people don't return emails, I have found in my line of work, because I'm a frontline supervisor at where I work, and we find a lot with the younger guys that doesn't happen. Even though they grew up in a digital world, that simple courtesy of, hey, I received this email and some sort of reply seems to almost be a generational thing. Have you seen that as well, or is it just more of a human thing?
No, I have kind of seen that. Now, I'm not going to say, I don't want to be a hypocrite. There are times when I have not returned an email, so it does happen. Some of them fall through the crack, but I find it a lot more pervasive these days. Back in the day when I went to college in the late 70s, I guess I'll date myself here, but one of the books that I had to read as part of my curriculum was a book by Amy Vanderbilt. I think it was a marketing class. And it was the Book of Etiquette. The Amy Vanderbilt Book of Etiquette, right? I'm like 19 years old. What am I going to do reading a book on etiquette? I never really thought about it till like the last decade. Yeah. Man, some of the things that Amy Vanderbilt wrote about, like just being congenial and being respectful. And, those things that used to be such a part of human interactivity, which have completely disappeared with this digital age, need to be readdressed or at least looked at, because I can assure you, if there's any millennials and young people listening, pick yourself up a copy of Amy Vanderbilt's Book of Etiquette and read it. It will set you apart from your peers. And yeah, I think that it is. I got my first laptop 10 years ago. I built a multi-million-dollar business without a laptop. Imagine that. Yeah. 4 years out of the 23 years that I was open was with a laptop. I did it without the internet. Yeah. I don't even know if you can do that these days. But I built my business on solid relationships. I knew the products that we sold, and we were great to our customers. And in fact, that most of our problems started when we even got onto the internet. So what does that tell you?
Right.
Something's kind of something you got to look at.
Well, and for all the good things that come with it, you really hit on a really good point. For all the good things that come with it, it's like anything, it's not all good. There's going to be a negative aspect to it, and there's a trade-off, and you always have to be willing to accept that trade-off. But then, like you said, there has to be almost a synergy where you pull back and say, okay, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater here. Let's bring back what's important and make more of a synergistic relationship.
Yeah, you're so right, Wayne. And that's a great point, because if you, like I said, if we can use these tools like we're using them now to get out good information and to trade and exchange stories and real conversation, then it's a good thing. But if we get on here to castigate somebody or to use these tools to be irresponsible, then we have to question really what our motives are. And that's the thing about the internet. You can be anybody that you want. You can say anything you want. and you can be as irresponsible as you want. But on the flip coin, like you say, when we use these for being responsible and for being real and trying to help our communities, then I think it's a good thing. So you're right. It's always two sides to the same coin for sure.
Yeah. So John, let me ask, tell us a little bit about your journey. And I know that's an open-ended question, but you can kind of start where you want and take us down the road.
Thank you, sir. I was born an Army brat, back in 1959, the last year, or one of the last years of the baby boomers, right? My dad was an Army officer. I was born in Germany. He spent 28 years in the military. I have two older sisters and a younger brother, and I ended up growing up in Sarasota, Florida. He did his active duty time, had his kids, then moved back to Florida after he got out of active duty service and joined, the reserves. So I grew up in a small town, what's a big town now, called Sarasota, Florida, on the west coast of Florida. We have the best beaches in the world. We have some phenomenal weather, and it was really a pretty decent childhood. Raised Catholic, went to high school, got my diploma, went away to FSU, got my degree. Bobby Bowden was our coach. Everybody knows Bobby Bowden, and got my degree in restaurant management. And then after a graduation, I went to work for a company called the Chart House, which was a Pillsbury company, or owned by Pillsbury at the time. And then anyhow, I moved around Southern California, opened up some restaurants, spent some time in the Virgin Islands, worked in Miami, really learned a lot about corporate management. And, it wasn't working for me. I found myself probably partying more than I should have, being in the restaurant business. And then I decided, you know what, I'm going to go to law school, right? Well, how do you go from restaurant management to law school? But I wanted to practice law. And the Army at that time in 1986 was offering 2, 3, and 4-year enlistments. So here I am, a college guy, and I enlisted to get my college fund. They tried to give me a direct commission, didn't take it, got stationed with the 4th Infantry Division out in Fort Carson, Colorado. Did my 3-year tour, got out, and didn't use my college fund. I got out and went to work right away, right? So when I finally did start to use the college fund several years later, the time ran out, and I only got to complete 2 years of an advanced course in Civil War history through American Military University. But during that time, I built a business with my wife, got married, and just kind of started living my life. And for 23 years, we ran a small store here in Sarasota. We sold high-end travel gear, backpacking gear, those things. And, we led guided trips to the Andes for 15 years, a little bit less than 15 years. And just had a great time building the business, raised 2 kids. And then in 2012, I was involved in an accident. And the accident involved alcohol. And I learned that maybe I wasn't having such a great time, that there was under the surface something that had really been bugging me. For 42 years, I hid a dark, dirty secret. Well, the accident gifted me with a traumatic brain injury, and immediately my life began to spin out of control. These massive mood swings, off the chart mood swings, anger and resentment. All my friends started to leave, and my wife was my business partner. She eventually did not want to work with me anymore, was not getting any sleep. There was something under the surface, and I still wasn't willing to come to grips with it. Meantime, we forced the sale of our very successful small business. A lot of people didn't know it in town because we had such a good reputation and weren't sure what was going on. And then my wife, it led to divorce proceedings. And it was a bad time, man. So my wife's, the universe always has a way of intervening. And my wife, her mother slipped and fell at 91 years old. So she had to go to Virginia to take care of her mom and to be a caretaker. So I'm sitting at home all alone at the holiday season for the first time in 26 years without my family, 26, 27 years. And I decided I don't think I want a divorce. So I hopped in my truck. I drove all the way to Virginia the day before Christmas, 2015. And Christmas morning, I knocked on the door, and she answered the door at her mom's house and basically said, "What are you doing here?"
Yeah.
And I said, honey, I think I want to stay married. And she says, "John, it's over. It's over." So literally got back in my truck, drove all the way down to Jacksonville, stayed in a Holiday Inn that night, 2015, and got literally no sleep, Wayne, none. I was up all night pacing. It was just weird. And I knew something was wrong. The next morning I got up. We went in to have breakfast. It was just the lady that worked there and me, the day after Christmas, 2015. And I got into my truck, got on the interstate, and decided it was time to call a crisis center because I wasn't feeling right. So the lady on the other end literally kept me on the line, talked me off the ledge, 45 minutes. There are people out there that want to help if you're in that dark place. And I ended up getting a little over 6 months of cognitive behavioral therapy, did a little bit of speech pathology so I could put, the damaged brain thoughts into something coherent. And then I had to let my wife go. The therapist said, we can save you, but we can't save your marriage. And it was probably the hardest thing that I had to do. But in that, a really good friend of mine who I was talking with, a few months into it, she says, "John," she says, "I'm going to recommend a book." It was called Radical Love. And she says, "Give your wife time and express some love to her and see what happens." So I read this book, I sent it to her, and I basically backed off from my wife. 11 months, I get this letter in the mail. It was a card, actually, like the week before Thanksgiving. And I opened it up. I got it in a drawer here. It basically said, "I want to let you know that I phoned my attorney this morning and I have called off our divorce. I've seen a huge change in you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Yeah, I dropped to my knees and I cried like a flipping baby, man. All of the stuff that I had done in the service and all the tough mountain climbing guy stuff meant nothing. That was probably one of the biggest accomplishments and probably one of the first times in my life that I tried my rear end off to do something, that took, that was right. And, saving your marriage is a good thing. And so since then, it's still a work in progress. Nothing's perfect. Relationships take hard work. We all know this. But since then, I've managed to get my thoughts together and create some great initiatives to help people in their businesses. GreenZone Hero came out of that. We're an online business directory for companies that support freedom and veterans and active duty personnel and their families. We give them marketing tools. It's a B2B business. And then out of that grew Straight Outta Combat Radio podcast, where we're diminishing the negative stereotype of our combat veterans, telling storytelling and those things. And then I've got the Force Zen podcast, where we're trying to educate people about healing modalities that aren't your proverbial modalities, your programs and procedures. And then I started, Aho Radio, the Authentic Human Outlier. It's our first YouTube channel. My co-host is Bill Protzman, who does Music Care Incorporated. And we discuss poetry and we discuss music. But we also interview people who are making differences in the lives of others, people with big missions. And we started that last month, and it's been a real treat. And then recently, of course, I'm long-winded giving you my background.
It's great stuff, though, John.
Everybody's got a story to tell, but thank you for giving me the podium. But so then in March I published my first book of poetry. It's 125 poems called Fractals: A Poetic Journey for Acceptance. And then putting together a speaker presentation called What's Your Apocalypse? Unlock your cells and be healed. And the dark secret that I was hiding, that I mentioned a few minutes ago, was a childhood sexual assault that happened to me in between the 3rd and 4th grades. And it sucked. You know, back then I was wise enough at that age to know that, you know, there was some type of stigma with it. It was extremely humiliating. I told nobody about it for over 4 decades, and lived kind of this sabotaging type behavior for a long time. Always was a hard charger, you know, an achiever, always looking for solutions, easy to get along with. My wife might say differently, but you know, team player and just, you know, all these things. But I always had a tendency when I had something really good to happen, I'd always manage to do something stupid, you know, overspend or you know, get angry and say something I didn't mean, and you know, just, you know, things that you really need to pay attention to in your life, but just didn't, you know. And I even look back on some of the high risk behavior, you know, the motorcycle, and, even the mountain climbing. You know, mountain climbing is not for everybody, and it's dangerous. You can die doing it. You know, just really, I was always on the edge, you know, especially when I was younger, 20s and 30s. You get a little bit wiser, I think, the older you get. But even then, at 52, I'm out drinking and driving. How wise is that? And what I found was that alcohol was a way to soothe pain. I didn't drink all the time, though, which was the weird thing. You know, occasionally, whenever, you know, the cat was out of the bag, or when the cat was away, the mice would play. And of course, I was out that night with a good buddy of mine, and you know, drinking and driving it's a bad deal. And didn't even drink that much, but it doesn't matter. One drink's too much when you're drinking and putting yourself behind a car, you know, the wheel of a car, and I could have killed myself or somebody else. And you know, now I live with the brain injury that doesn't go away. It's there all the time, and I just learned to deal with it. So yeah, it's been a long and winding road, and not done yet. Still looking forward to the future, and you know, hoping I can make an impact in people's lives and in their businesses too.
Yeah. Well, and so there's a few things, John, that I want to unpack. I love, like, one of the things you talk about is this is a quote from one of your websites, says, "I'm a sincere supporter of initiatives that improve the quality of life for humankind, both economically and spiritually." If I could, I love the title of your one, Authentic Human Outlier. What is an authentic human to you?
Somebody that's totally in touch with who they are. What, you know, you understand your weaknesses, you understand your strengths, you dwell on your strengths, you know, and you pray that the weaknesses go away. And, you know, somebody, you know, and I said earlier, a little bit earlier, Wayne, that, you know, we can be anything we want, you know, we can create these personas. I think that that's pretty cool. But I also think that we lose sight of humanity when we create a persona that may not necessarily be real. And I think that we see the downside of this en masse, you know, at the level with all this technology, because it seems to be a topic of conversation everywhere I go these days. People, they're distrustful. They don't really know who to talk to, who to deal with, because there's been so much inauthenticity that it creates an environment that you got to keep your head on a swivel. And what I have found myself personally, coming up out of the ashes, is that when you have this fear of being who you are, and only you know what that is, you know, I don't know what my wife is thinking all the time, and I really don't know what you're thinking. And, you know, we know what we're thinking.
Right.
But when you can look in that mirror, and I'll tell you something that my therapist did, how I started this to find out what authenticity meant. She said, "I'm going to ask you to do an exercise." I said, "Okay." You know me, I never volunteer, but in this case, I wanted help.
Right.
She says, when you get up in the middle of the night, because I know you have this insomnia, and it's 2:30, and you're tossing and turning, do me a favor. I said, "Okay." She says, "Flip on the light switch in your bathroom, look at yourself in the mirror." She says, "Really look at yourself in the mirror, and you tell that person how much you love them. You tell that person how much you care about them. You tell that person how cool they are." So I'm thinking, this is ridiculous, right? Just like I was thinking when I was reading Amy Vanderbilt. And I tried it. So I got up Wasn't sleeping. I went in. I was looking around the room, Wayne, to see if anybody was watching me do this crazy thing. And I said, I love you, man. I love you, John. You're all right. And that's how it went for like the first few nights. It would last like 15 seconds. First week, fine, I'm getting it. The second week, I'm talking to myself for a minute. You really did a stupid thing yesterday, but you know what? I love you. That thing that you did was pretty cool. And what happened was, over a period of time, something that we all need to do, and it's not inappropriate to it's not that creepy kind of love. It's self-love that, that comes from within. And I found the exercise so life-changing because I never believed in myself. I never loved myself. I thought I was this dirty, rotten kid who was just a human piece of flesh that somebody abused at a young time in my life. And on the surface, I looked good and I was confident and I could get stuff done. But on the inside, I never fully appreciated who I really am.
Yeah.
And that's what people would like to see when they talk to us. They'd like to see somebody that's completely vulnerable, somebody that is completely real, and somebody that's been there, done that, and has a willingness to share those stories like we're doing right now, and a willingness to help. If you can figure out the pain points that somebody has, whether it's in business or in their personal lives, and you have something of value, then you can be really an extraordinary person for humanity. And that's what I'm on now, just like you with these stories, Wayne, and your podcast show. You are affecting people's lives in a positive manner by allowing guys like me and the other guests that you've had on the show to tell their stories in the hopes that we can reach at least one person.
Yeah.
That's powerful. It's something that's inside of you, Wayne, and inside of me. It's something that if we exercise who we are going to make tremendous impact in our humanity. And that's what I'm starting to connect with now. I'm meeting guys like you and, and people on my own show, and I'm starting to feel really good. And I'd say it's really started to happen just these last 6 or 7 months. I've started to really attract people, and I will just love it. And anyhow, I don't want to take up,
No, it's great stuff, John. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's one of the neat things about podcasting in general is being able to have, because these used to be coffee shop conversations. We'd meet up or whomever, you'd meet that person and sit down and have the power of their story, because that's really what it is, because there's commonality in it, and yet there's power in it, because we all run into these different things. And then it used to just be like a coffee shop conversation. And now this is maybe one of those positive sides of the internet again, we can have this conversation that can actually benefit a lot of other people because they can resonate with it. They hear their own story intertwined through things and experiences that you've been through and I've been through and others have been through.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's kind of strange, man, not to cut you off there, but when I came out, with the childhood assault story, I was absolutely blown away at how many people in private messaging, on LinkedIn, too, where you wouldn't expect that. People in some really interesting high positions, men and women. Hey, John, thank you for telling your story. Oh, and by the way, when I was 8 years old at Uncle Billy's house, this happened.
Yeah.
I was absolutely blown away at the men and women, and quite a few, more than one's too many, that had a very similar story. So I think you're right, Wayne. I think that when we can share these stories, people that are listening, and we're so glad to have listeners here. Really, I'm thank you for listening to Wayne's show, because it means a lot, and hopefully you're still listening. But when we can share these stories and people can realize that they're not alone, we can have a huge part in creating authentic people out there too, if that makes any sense at all.
It absolutely does. And I think that it's very important. In fact, I was going to kind of go down a little bit of the trauma road, because you talk a lot about it in what led you to your book, Fractals. And let me start with this question. How do you define trauma?
Trauma is a horrific event. Now, it's a good question. Let me plug in my computer before it goes out. Hang on. I just got an update. Okay. Great question. Trauma is different for everybody. You know, trauma doesn't necessarily have to be sexual assault. It can be bullying. It can be financial ruin. It can be, you know, horrific accident, injury. It can be combat experience. It can be divorce. It can be anything, you know, because we all are affected by it. But, you know, trauma takes no prisoners. There's no difference in class or gender or, you know, race. It affects all of us. You know, it's been said that 70% of humans have been affected by at least one trauma, and another, you know, 40% have been affected by multiple traumas. So it's something that affects every single one of us. But here's the interesting thing about trauma. Trauma affects us at a genetic, really at a molecular level, because we have this human survival tool called fear. It's a human emotion. And when a traumatic event happens, the body emits massive amounts of glucose, you know, because you got to get ready to either fight or flight. But it also emits adrenaline. Sometimes there's a dopamine rush. So, and it gets stored.
Yeah.
So then we heard the word trigger. And then what happens is this stored memory of fear stays in our brain, locked in our brains. Like one of my hashtags is unlock your cells, you know, open your brain, unlock the cell that you put yourself in. And then we get triggered. And then rather than think rationally, we go back to the fear response and we continue on with the same negative behavior or the same negative emotion or the same negative belief. And what happens is we stack these traumatic events under the guise of fear. The body reacts. Fear can literally keep you from moving forward in your life, but trauma affects your emotional state. It affects your physical state. It affects so many other things that eventually the aging process is sped up. Addictions kick in, you know, how to deal with that pain. And even some of the, you know, your cardiovascular system gets elevated. If you're out of shape, you know, you could actually die from it. Yeah. So depressed trauma, traumatic events, not dealing with it, and that fear can actually lead to some pretty significant physical and mental consequences, which outlining 70% of the population, you know, most people don't deal with it. And that's why we have a population that is somewhat broken. You know, depression's at an all-time high. Addictions are just out of, you know, internet porn and internet gambling. And, you know, these things are just, I read the other day, we're 56 million hits a day on pornography. I mean, come on, you know, but those are all responses, usually these high-risk behaviors to something traumatic that we're not really dealing with, or a repressed emotion that we haven't come to grips with. You know, emotional pain sucks. Believe me, I'm a poster child for emotional pain. You know, post-traumatic stress for 4 decades because I never dealt with a childhood assault. 90 seconds destroyed so many good pieces of my life. And in turn, I was able to give that ball of shit to other people at various times in my life. So trauma is something we need to deal with, and we need to do it together. You know, I was the last person on the earth that I ever thought would call a suicide crisis hotline. John Krotec, really? Oh yeah, really. It took me a lot of courage, but I knew that I knew that I needed help, and I knew that I couldn't. Gosh, I was thinking about suicide ideation, but I couldn't bring myself to that point. I thought maybe there's something I can do before it gets to that point. And I'm so glad that I did. You know, trauma sucks. Trauma takes no prisoners. And if you're dealing with a personal trauma and you can't do it alone, reach out to somebody, because there are people on the ends of those lines that can help you, and even people in law enforcement. You know, sometimes these first responders and sheriff's deputies and law enforcement, police, they're sometimes the first people on that line of defense. And what I like about those skilled technicians is that they've been trained to deal with people's emotional states. And sometimes law enforcement gets a bad rap, and you know, just like in any profession, you're going to have the aberrations, but for the most part, I have to give high fives and kudos all around for those first responders and law enforcement and fire department, and even people that are on the front lines in a foxhole somewhere.
Yeah.
These people that are wearing the uniform that have gone and answered the call of duty, rare individuals, they're out there on the front lines every day dealing not only with other people's trauma, but their own at times. And it's important for all of us to hang together. It's like a brother and a sisterhood. It just is something we need to do, man.
Yeah, that's so true. Let me ask, this is going to be another quick rabbit trail, but when you said you have a degree in Civil War history, I had to ask, because this is something that I've been kicking around a lot lately. And it kind of is in line with the very end of that last statement that you made. We are in, and I'm not talking like secession and that kind of thing, but I'm talking just division as a country. We are in a time of strong division in this country. And as a student of the Civil War, and as someone who's looked at that, what do you think are some of the lessons that we should be looking at when we talk just in ideological, governmental differences? I'm not talking obviously the greater, you know, some of the things that led to the Civil War, but I'm just talking more in the greater ideological standpoint of division.
Well, you know, this is whether we like the current administration or not. Now is not the time to continue with some of the rhetoric, the hateful rhetoric that I hear. You can't always agree with the government, but I think personally they're doing the best they can. And let me tell you a story about Abraham Lincoln, you know, for all you Constitution lovers out there. Abraham Lincoln imprisoned several hundred people and basically threw away the writ of habeas corpus. I mean, he literally shredded the Constitution, right? And so you go, holy cow, how did he get away with that? Well, his master plan, if you will, was to keep the states together. Abraham Lincoln knew that if the United States failed because of a civil war, the experiment for freedom and democracy was over. The
Right.
republic would die. All of those earlier patriots' actions and would just be put to naught, and it would have been a big waste of time. So he suspends the writ of habeas corpus, throws these people in jail because he deemed them enemies of the state. And then we all know what happened in the Civil War. I mean, there were many different socioeconomic reasons for the war. We can debate them, which is good as long as it's a healthy debate. But, I mean, you had the Yankees and you had the rebels. And they had a common bond, which was the English language. But, you know, even though they were from all over the place, there was still a common bond. There was brother against brother. I can't tell you how many stories in the Civil War when the sides put their arms down and went over to the front lines and shared stories. And, you know, Fredericksburg is one of them. They were throwing supplies back and forth. And, you know, so I think you know, it's okay to have an ideology, but as Americans, if you really look at the Constitution and you really look deep at what it's all about, we are the beacon for the rest of the world, even in today's day and age. You may not believe that, the younger generation, I don't know, but we are still the beacon of something really good. And as a person who's traveled around the globe quite a bit, I can assure you, if you've never traveled, the rest of the world, to include Canada and the UK and these other great free countries, do not have what we've got. And that freedom has come with a high price. Something every American needs to think about. And to denigrate the office of the presidency, that I've seen both sides do, as something that is dangerous. It's not only dangerous to our personal karma, but it's dangerous to the country as a whole. And I would just suggest this, and I'd throw down the gauntlet. What's more important, blowing off personal steam or personal ideology, or thinking about the bigger picture and trying to be part of a solution that gets America through this COVID-19? You know, rise up. And I don't mean rise up with sticks and stones and clubs. Rise up inside and be an American. But let's be Americans together. My grandparents came here and didn't even speak English. My grandfather, who raised 7 kids in the city of Pittsburgh, I'm a Steeler fan, didn't even speak English. All of his children served in one branch of the service or another. And they left me a legacy. They've left all of us a legacy, our ancestors that came here before us. And if you're a first-line immigrant, then God bless you. Thank you for making it here. But we have a legacy. And if we let that legacy die, then shame on us. But let's do it with some decorum. Let's have healthy debate. Forget all this hatred. Everybody's lives matter. Everybody. I wore a t-shirt last summer. I was going through the airport. A good buddy of mine, I love this guy dearly. Wade Whiskey, he goes by. Wade Samberin. He has an organization called Heartstrings for Heroes.
Okay.
And they make custom guitars for Purple Heart recipients. This guy does a phenomenal job. And he gave me this t-shirt, and on the back it said, "Military lives matter." Okay.
Yeah.
I wore that through the airport. I got to tell you, Wayne, it was phenomenal. I had African Americans. I had white Americans. I had Caucasians. I had Latin Americans. I had Asian Americans. I had men, women, all ages come up to me and give me a thumbs up. Great t-shirt. Because in the military, it didn't matter what your political party was. Right. It didn't matter what branch you were. The only thing that mattered, of course, the chain of command, you had to take orders from somewhere. But right. The only thing that mattered was the mission. And if more Americans thought like military minds do, can you imagine how phenomenal? It's phenomenal enough, but can you imagine how much greater America could become if right. we just exercised a little bit of respect for each other? That's what my grandparents left me. They left me a legacy. And if I'm not part of something to raise it up, then shame on me, man. They wasted their time. And I would hate to say that my grandparents, who couldn't speak English, who left Croatia because they had such a rough time with the Serbs, who I have nothing against, but thank God they came here, because look at where I live. I live in the United States of America. I can get in my Jeep, drive down to the local store on a paved road, not worry about getting robbed or whatever. Might not be that way in some cities, but I've got so much going for me that if I don't show a little bit of gratitude, then maybe I need to leave. And believe me, I'm not going to leave. I'm going to stay here along with the rest of everybody else and see this bad boy through. And I hope that when I get old and gray and it's time for me to check out, I hope that I've done something good for my country. And anyhow, I feel like I'm on a campaign.
John, like I said, every time I've had the privilege of sitting down and listening to you, it's hard for me to not want to end with amen. So again, amen. That you are absolutely correct. And I know that was a complete rabbit trail. In fact, it's completely outside my notes, but in the last couple the last couple shows that I've done, that I do my own monologue show, this has really been, I've been looking back at the Civil War, because I really think that period in America lessons, and there's all sorts of, whether you're on the Federalist side, whether you believe in states' rights, I mean, you can get into the weeds on all that, and that's not where I'm going. But just when you get into the division side, I mean, I think that what we're going through now is almost unprecedented, because even media that may be on different sides of the fence is pointing out that usually when this kind of thing happens, there's a coming together. We're all American, after 9/11, we're all American, we're coming together and we're going to fight this thing. And sadly, that's not what's happening. In fact, more so than probably in my memory, we're actually seeing even more divisiveness and very partisan response to a very nonpartisan enemy. I mean, COVID-19, whatever it is and whatever it's doing, the one thing you can say for sure is it's nonpartisan. It has no political affiliation.
Kind of like trauma, right? I mean,
exactly.
It takes no prisoners. Well, that's a great point, Wayne, because there's no one size shoe fits all to deal with this COVID-19, right? Yeah. And what we have to do, what I've seen is common sense literally has gone out the window. I mean, I saw somebody driving the other day, and unless they're sick, I don't know, but 85-degree weather with the windows rolled up and wearing a mask. That's like the epitome of fear. And I understand risk management, but risk management needs to be combed with common sense. But when it comes to leadership, the leadership that we need is leadership that's calm and leadership that instills confidence, not anxiety and fear. And quite frankly, to support what you just said, I see a lot of leaders, unfortunately, on both sides of the aisle that are instilling levels of fear and anxiety that good leaders don't need to be instilling, or at least inciting. I have seen some of the craziest things in American political leadership ever during this COVID-19. And there are two things. They're either extremely out of touch with the people, or they're just plain not too intelligent of leaders. Because leadership, you don't get leadership by virtue of your position as a politician or as wherever you are in your company. Leadership is something that has to be nurtured. And the good leaders are the leaders that can be in touch with their authentic sides, and a leader that instills confidence and not fear and hatred. And I got to tell you, there's some leaders that need not be leading because, we have that power at the ballot box. And I would say, don't fall for the hype. Don't fall into hatred and divisive rhetoric. Support the leaders that instill confidence and calm, and not the ones that fan the flames of division. Because I can assure you, we're a lot stronger together than we are apart. And you don't think that there are some countries in the world that aren't relishing this great division in America? I know who they are.
Yeah.
They're our enemies, whether we believe it or not. There are some countries that would love to see America just fold. And I got news for them. As long as I'm breathing, I'm going to do whatever I can to be part of the solution and not this hateful rhetoric. Just not going to do it, man.
Absolutely, John. And I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, for as long as I'm here, I intend to do the same. So
I knew you would, man.
So let's go down just real quick. You got a few more minutes?
Absolutely. That's your show, man. I'm here. You got me.
All right, John, let's just go down. Let's talk about Fractals a little bit. Let's talk about the book. What was the process? Because when it comes to poetry, let me preface this by saying two things. First of all, you're a warrior. And I always love, so when you talk poetry, usually you get, because before law enforcement, and most of my listeners know this, I was in landscaping. So I know plants, flowers, etc. So normally you get this look, this statement, and it seems to kind of be the same thing when you talk about poetry, that they can't put together warrior and poet, even though the Scottish, of course, that was what they were known as, poet warriors. But they can't seem to always put those two together. So when you talk poetry, there's almost a non-masculine or an unmasculine thinking there. And then the other side of it is it's kind of dismissive, this emotional side where people are like, well, yeah, that's good, that's fine, but I don't understand it either. So can you just kind of take us into the process of writing it and what that was like for you coming from being a warrior?
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Poetry, at one time still is, I'd like to think, was a huge part of people's lives. And, Vishen Lakhiani of Mind Valley put out the book, The Code of the Extraordinary Mind. And he talks about the culture scape. In this culture scape, what we call, knuckle draggers. And, I started writing poetry back in middle school, not long after this event happened to me. And I remember one poem in particular, Why I Hate Being a Guy. Right. So here I am in the 4th grade thinking about that. And I know I'm a guy, right? So, guys would sit around and they would think, and I'm a guy and I've been there and I played that game, think it's really cool to be tough and to put other people down. And what I realized in that is that we all have emotions and feelings. And I know a lot of guys that are very, very emotional and are warriors. And sometimes, men need these refuges where we can go and talk, kind of like the AHO radio, a place where we can level with each other and be. I think that, I don't know, man. You got me. It was a form of self-expression for me. Poetry is a form of expression, and it's kind of funny because I picked up a book not long ago called the Poetry of War, or the War of Poetry, and the author had gone back all the way back to the Roman times, and all of these great warrior poets, through translation, all the way through all the great Macedonian War and the Roman Empire, and all the way through those things. My battery's running low, it says. And long story short, poetry is a way for me to exercise who I am and to come to grips with certain emotions that were troubling to me. And so I've got over like 5,000 poems that I put together. And a friend of mine said, write a poem or publish a book about poems. And I'll show you if anybody can see this. This is the cover of the book. And on this side is a little 3rd grade guy wearing a Cub Scout uniform. That's the guy before the trauma. And then a guy over here on this side after the trauma. You can see a distinct difference.
Yeah.
One kid's inquisitive, loves people, really wants to go on to the next, camp out. And then the other kid hates people, trusts nobody, thinks there's something wrong with him, a complete outcast, but tries to fit in. So I put together 125 poems, found a really neat company out in Arizona, Kim Richardson Publishing. It was a phenomenal experience. She led me all the way through the editing, the publishing, putting it out through Amazon, KDP, and Kindle and all that. And we hit the best-selling category in 4 different categories. Poetry, international for poetry. And people go, well, that's Amazon bestseller. Yeah, but you're still competing with other books that same 5-day period. And so we got that. We got sexual abuse, depression, and emotional healing. And I had 1,800 downloads in one day. And we're still selling the book. And it's just a way to let people know that they're not alone. The mission is to reach at least one person with one poem a day, and men and women. And I tell you, the reviews were phenomenal. I didn't expect the reviews. And I just, what a blessed process. And it's just my way. Long after I'm gone, a good friend, John Preston, talked about the 1,000-year warrior. He's a Marine out on the West Coast who I met at one of these events in Texas. And he talks about 1,000 years after I'm gone, there'll be something written that I was able to leave, whatever that is in your life. And so when you say warrior, thank you for that accolade, because it means a lot. But I'm a 1,000-year warrior now, because I'm hoping that maybe if humankind lasts that long, there'll be something left of me that somebody will be able to read. And I may not ever write another book, but with 5,000 poems and some self-help ideas going in my head, you're probably going to see something else from me in the future.
That's
Thanks.
great. Yeah, and for the listeners, I haven't read all of them, but the poems that I have read, one of the things I like that you also do is there's a subtext on there. So you have the poem itself, but then you also kind of describe it in some minor brushstrokes, just so the reader can kind of get into the poem as well. If the language of the poem itself doesn't take you there, there's a subtext that actually takes you there as well.
No, and thanks for pointing that out, Wayne. I'm hoping this thing is still charging. But anyhow, I don't want it to die. But thank you for that, because in most poetry books, sometimes you'll read a poem, you don't have a clue as to what they're talking about, and a lot of us don't have a lot of time to try to figure it out. But I always thought that those brush strokes that you described were a way at least somebody could connect to them and at least get something out of it. And we also have a table of contents with numbered pages, which makes it a little bit easier to identify it by title. I just thought that a lot of the poetry books out there, people lose interest because a lot of them don't have table of contents. And I think that, you have to be able to at least let people find them fairly easy. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite poem that you can quickly share with us for your computer dies?
Well, Well, my favorite poem that I like is C.C. Cummings. I carry your heart. I'm not going to read that, but I can, and I'll just crack open a page and we'll just read one right out of it. Doesn't really matter.
Yeah, no, sounds good.
I don't want to read that one. No, here you go. Plains View Jacket. I wanted a buffalo with a burly coat, dark as the pitch night, thick as wildfire smoke, soft as silk, unfettered from inhibitions, in order to create a winter jacket for staying cozy under the winter moon in fields of alabaster flake after the wine cups perish. It's really about the desires and words and thoughts of a high plains human. There's a lot in there. It's a short poem, but a lot in there.
Yeah.
I thought about what would a high plains warrior be thinking about. He's thinking about, those cold winter nights, the the snow laying on the ground and the wine cups, after a festive evening,
Right.
Something soft, but still burly enough to keep them warm, and just expressing it that way. So, high plains view, somebody that would have been a warrior thinking about something so simple as a buffalo jacket.
Yeah.
And so often we look at these different cultures and we think that they're, primitive or archaic. And, the buffalo for the Plains Indian was everything. It was life. So the high plains view was that buffalo jacket or coat that would keep him warm and safe in the wintertime, gave him life. And so it was kind of more of a reverence poem to the buffalo and to the Plains Indians. So,
and as a huge fan of bison,
that's why I read it. You know what? There's a reason the universe works like that. And so I just, thanks for allowing me an opportunity to share that. But, if you're interested in fractals, you can find it on Amazon. And also I think that there's a page to it on my what'syourapocalypse.com website. So
perfect.
If you know somebody that's suffering or you yourself wants to start getting back into poetry, I don't know how great it is, but I think it's fairly decent. And pick yourself up a copy of Fractals. I think you'll enjoy it.
Absolutely. And I'll be sure to link all that up in the show notes, John. And I've had an opportunity to read a few of them. Bent Rewire Healing was one that I read. Just beautiful. The use of metaphor and so forth in it. And it just is powerful for each and every one of us. As a matter of, and I'll make sure that that's all linked in the show notes so everyone can find it.
Thanks, man.
As a matter of closing here, John, let me ask you a question that I ask kind of everybody. And what is the one takeaway, the one thing that law enforcement officers, or it can be people in general, but law enforcement officers can do that's going to make a difference in their personal lives?
Just keep the brotherhood and the sisterhood strong. If you're out there, anyhow, I have a lot of appreciation for law enforcement. A lot of my buddies are the sheriff of our county is a good friend. And just keep incommunicado, talk to each other. The one takeaway is, whatever you're going through as a law enforcement officer or a sheriff's deputy, your buddies and, your buddiettes are going through the same thing, and you got to talk about it. Y'all are doing a great job and you have a tough job to do. You're servants of the public, and people look up to you, and set the example. Every time you put your uniform on, I know it's hot because some of those uniforms are dark, but you're doing the community's work. You're helping our community stay safe, and set the example. And you can't do it all the time. It's sometimes easier said than done. Sometimes things are going to piss you off, and certain situations are going to get under your skin, especially when you're doing it day in, day out. But just remember, your job is so valuable to the United States of America, to your neighborhoods, to your community. I can't say enough about law enforcement, and don't let some of the rhetoric that we hear sometimes get you down, because more people feel like I do than not. And we need you. We take care of yourself. We need you out there on the front lines, and we need you around. So if things are bugging you, talk to the people you work with.
Great. That's absolutely great advice. John, how can people connect with you?
Well, I'm on Facebook, John Krotec, Krotec. You can go to my company, GreenZoneHero.com. If you got a small business organization, or you as an individual needs more exposure, which is a pain point for business owners, or you want to differentiate yourself by supporting freedom publicly, then you can go there. You can also find what'syourapocalypse.com. And we got the AHO Radio, AHO Radio Network on YouTube. So my email is john@greenzonehero.com. I don't mind putting my cell phone out there, 941-400-7333, 941-400-7333. Call me anytime. And I just, Wayne, I got to tell you, man, you've asked me some interesting questions, and you kept it real. And that's all any guest on your show can ask for. And, it's a great credit to you, and I appreciate it.